What's up, guys? Welcome to Selfie Cam. It's time for tennis. So I just actually literally grabbed my last racket and I did a review on it and talked about why I'm selling it, and I just grabbed this one and I'm doing the same thing. So this is a back-to-back recording, at least on my end. So let me tell you about why I'm selling the VCORE, or the EZONE 98 Plus. The VCORE is the last one I did. I'm sorry. I'm apologizing to the racket because I got your name wrong. So this is the EZONE 98 Plus. I should probably tell you why I bought it in the first place. So this is a funny story with this racket. I've actually bought and sold this racket like 4 times. Not literally this one, but this model. Bought it and sold it a few times. And it seems like my intrigue and my conclusion in the end is kind of the same every time, which is so funny that I ended up coming back to this racket multiple times. It's just so silly. I feel ridiculous kind of, but it is what it is, you know? Anyway, the reason I bought this racket was because I wanted to try extended length rackets, and the EZONE 98 Plus seemed like the only reasonable extended length racket on the market that really caught my eye. I think the other options at the time were the VCORE 98 Plus, and that was different than the one that I ended up selling recently. That was like the generation before, because yeah, this racket's just an older model. You know, the EZONE comes up before the VCORE. That was my main reason for getting it, and the other ones were like the Babolat Pure Drive and the Pure Aero, and I'm not really a fan of those rackets, so to speak. They're just so Babolat, as I say, and I feel like you should know what that means. I think Babolat Aero Pros and Pure Drives, or Pure Aeros, whatever, they kind of define the end of a spectrum in a way for tennis rackets. So I didn't go with those. I did demo them actually, but I ended up just not going with them. So I went with this, and that's the reason I bought it. I bought it mostly because it kind of felt like the only option out there. This racket was the only game in town, as they say. I always felt like it was just a little bit too powerful. Sometimes I don't like it when people say that. I feel like, well, maybe you just need to work on your touch, or you need to work on your control, because when people buy control rackets, they kind of say, well, you need to be able to generate your own power. So why do people buy powerful rackets and then say that, and then don't say that you need to work on your control? It's kind of funny, right? You should be able to generate your own control, and you should be able to have your own you should be able to have your own power, and you should be able to have your own control. They're both strengths, and you can't rely on your racket to do everything for you. But some rackets are just a little better at certain things, or play to certain strengths more so than other rackets do, and that's totally the case with this one. So my personal feelings on this racket are that it is a little bit too powerful for me. I'm not a fan of the 16x19 string pattern, again, but I went to it because, again, only game in town. I was coming from an 18x20, as I said in my last video, but I went with the 16x19 because I don't think there's any 18x20 extended length rackets out there. There might be like this Pro Kenix one, and I think I tried it, but I didn't like it. Kind of had this 8-ball. It was like a black and yellow, but 8-ball design or something. It was a strange looking racket. Didn't feel so good. It was very mushy. Only had so much power, and then it just felt like you're not allowed to hit any harder than that, which is weird. I hit harder, and then the racket just flexed more and never gave me any more power. So I felt like I outpowered that racket, actually. You ever feel like that? You've outpowered a racket, it just runs out of power. It just keeps flexing. It's happened to me on a few rackets. This is not one of those rackets, by the way. The more power you give, the more it delivers. This racket absolutely can be like a freaking baseball bat. I mean, its power is no joke. So if that's what you're looking for, I think this racket is a great racket for that. My issue with that is that it just seemed to have that power in situations where I didn't necessarily want it. Like maybe I'm approaching for a volley, or I'm approaching to put away kind of a steep angle shot, and then the ball just flies out. And I try so long to get used to it, and it just, it's always kind of an issue. I mean, that's the reality with this racket. Like, yes, I should have more control and all that stuff. And I worked on that and it got better, but it still just felt like this racket just makes a lot of these touch shots so much harder than they need to be. And still, it just seemed like the racket would just cause the ball to fly. And you're like, well, what was that? What the heck, man? I don't think this racket has the best feel. I'll say that. I don't feel that connected to the ball. If you're not looking for an extended length racket, I might just say that the VCORE 97 Pro 310 is better than this racket in a lot of ways, and I think that its power is actually kind of comparable. It's probably not as powerful on the higher end of it, but that racket offers a lot of power for how comfortable and control-oriented that racket is, and I just did a review on that. You can see why I'm selling it, but you'll also see why I had so many good things to say about it. And I have good things to say about this racket too, but I feel like it's just maybe not as versatile. I think that this racket is much more of a baseline player's racket. It offers pretty good spin, but it has kind of a dense drill pattern. Like, yes, it is a 16 by 19, but the mains and the crosses are a little bit more closer to the center, so to speak, whereas a Babolat, you know, the bottom cross will be super close to the throat and so on. It's much more spread out for a 16-19. This is a pretty dense 16 by 19, but it is still a very powerful racket. And that's my main reason for selling it. I think it doesn't have great touch or great feel or great control. Directional control is great because it's kind of stiff, but it just generally has a lot more power than I'm looking for in a lot of situations. I feel like I have to string kind of high, and this racket's kind of stiff. It's I think it's rated at 64, but it feels a little bit stiffer than that. It honestly feels like it's getting into Babolat territory with the stiffness. You'll be the judge of that yourself, I guess, but yeah, just a lot more power than I want. So it's mainly those two things, and the reason that I got it in the first place was because it was extended length. And the reason I kept coming back to it and selling it is because I felt like it's too powerful. I want to keep looking, and then eventually I'm not happy with what I find, and I'm like, well, I played pretty well with that EZONE 98 Plus. Maybe I can just get used to that. And I bought and sold this racket a few times going through that same loop, and it's so funny. It makes me feel like I'm indecisive, but what really happened is that I felt a certain way about the racket, and I went back into the market and tried some other stuff, and then felt, well, that's not really working. I guess I'll go back to the EZONE, but I never really felt like, all right, the EZONE's my racket. It was always my placeholder, and I wanted to keep looking, but I just couldn't find anything I liked better, so I kept coming back to the EZONE 98 Plus. So I actually have quite a long history with this racket. I know it well. I think over the course of selling it and buying it a few times, I've actually probably owned this racket for a solid total of maybe a year and a half. I've played maybe 2 years, I don't actually know exactly how long ago this racket came out, but I've spent a lot of time with it. But I think this will be the last time that I'm buying and selling this racket. This is a final goodbye, my sweet baby. We've had wonderful times together, and I know that we got along for the most part, but you know, I think long term, if we're going to get serious, it's just not going to work out, and I think you know why. And it's nothing personal, but I wish the best for you, and I hope that you find an owner that just appreciates what you have to offer a little more than I do. Because, yeah, sometimes we don't get along when things get a little closer to the net. And every now and then you just sort of spray a ball, and I'm like, what the hell, man? But I know it's not your fault. It's not your fault. Anyway, yeah, that's my story as to why I'm selling the VCORE or the EZONE 98 Plus. I already did the video on why I'm selling the VCORE 98 Plus. So yeah, thanks for watching, and yeah, I'm going to grab the next racket that I'm selling. I'm selling everything off. You know what this means? It means that I have a couple of rackets that I'm really actually happy about. They might represent I think at least they represent me being close to the end of this journey. They don't necessarily mean that they're the rackets and I figured it out, I'm done, but it means that I've figured it out at least enough to know that I'm not going to be keeping any of the 16 by 19 rackets around. So that's good. That's progress. I feel like I have to keep explaining myself. Like, I'm not crazy. I'm not just buying and selling rackets all the time and just, you know, flopping around the honeymoon phase and all that. I'm legitimately on a journey to find a racket that is extended length. And if I have to make it extended myself, then so be it. I will do that. So I'm kind of at that point now where I'm looking at rackets that are standard length, just because, you know, that opens up the market to me looking at literally anything. And I'm just focusing on the rackets that are 16 by 20 or 18 by 20, because that's a string pattern that I'm generally much more satisfied with. I like the control that they offer. I don't feel like you're really compromising on the spin. I feel like you can just lower the tension and get some of that power and that spin back, which is kind of the goal for me. I feel like you have to raise the tension on a 16 by 19 to get the control, whereas it would just be much more comfortable and spin friendly, right? If you can actually lower the tension to bring some of that comfort and that power and that spin back without losing so much of the control element, because the denser string pattern is just not going to have as much of a trampoline effect as a 16 by 19. That's really where the power comes from. And I think spin, when it comes to strings, is much more technique dependent than string dependent. But obviously strings and string patterns make a difference. But I feel like if you're comparing two identical rackets, but the string pattern is different, that would be a much less significant difference than two different strings in a 16 by 19, for example. I've talked about this a little bit in other videos, but I don't think that string pattern is the most important thing for spin potential. Obviously, technique is the most important thing, but that has nothing to do with the racket. When it comes to the racket, I think the most important thing is actually the twist weight relative to the swing weight. If you ever really want to get into it, there's something called a polarized racket setup, and people talk about that. So basically the less stable a racket is, the more spin friendly the racket should be, at least. So, you know, if everything else is really spin friendly about it, the strings in your technique and stuff, and the string pattern, a more polarized racket that is less stable should be more spin friendly than the same racket that is more stable, i.e. it has more weight on the 3 and 9 or something to increase the twist weight. But yeah, that's probably getting into territory where people are like, no, you don't know what you're talking about. But yeah, that's fine. I'm not going to get into it here. You can figure that out for yourself or look into forums about it, but you'll still see a bunch of arguments saying one or the other. But really, you just got to find out for yourself what works for you. That's really what it's about. And yeah, I'll just stop it there before I ramble on too much. Yeah, this racket's going to find a new owner sometime. And that'll be that. I will grab one more racket because that's the next one that I'll be selling. Thanks for watching, like, subscribe, etc., etc., etc. I'll see you in the next video. Okay, bye.